Jack, great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you, Mike, too.
Happy New Year. We are
Yeah.
actually, in the first-ish day. I know my mortgage came due, so there you go. I'm broke. So how are you, Jack? Hopefully more prosperous than me.
Well, yeah, prosperity is kind of a goal, right? Long-term goal, Doesn't happen today, but maybe tomorrow.
As long as they don't kick me out, I think that's all I'm aiming for right now. Like,
Mm,
nobody's gonna come to the door and be like, okay, not now. Your rent is overdue.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, we have a topic today. As usual, I'm confused. I know you have all the answers, so you can guide me to see if I have. I'm trying to. I don't know. Do you ever use this phrase mental model? Is that just an HCI phrase?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yes, I wrote a few papers in that field, so yeah, mental models are big. Yeah.
Oh, well, good. No wonder we get along. Well, I don't know if the general public understands this term. Um,
Mm,
is there a way to explain it that would make sense to most people? Because as I said, I think of it more as like uh, well, in designing interfaces, it's a big idea because people don't know how
mm,
things work, right? So their mental model may be either one that's understanding, like, hey, if you click on something, something will happen. The
mm.
sort of causational mental model, right? Like how
Yeah,
do you
yeah,
do stuff? Is
yeah,
that
exactly.
how you'd explain it too? I mean, and why would we care, right?
Yeah, well, everybody's got different background, right? Like you might be a fan of Star Wars, and I might be a fan of Star Trek. And our mental model of a robot will be totally different, right? I mean, in
Oh,
Star Wars, you would think a robot is going to be this kind of, maybe R2D2 style, or maybe this kind of like little awkward C3PO. But if you are a Star Trek fan, then your mental model is Commander Data, right? Which is, apparently much higher, in terms of, complexity and capabilities than let's say C3PO, right? So we might have different kind of mental model of the capabilities and how they work and stuff like that.
love it. No, that's a great example, by the way, because you kind of went into fiction, right? But as we see robots, especially
Mm.
now, robots always seem humanoid, which still boggles me because I'm like, don't we have enough humans to do
Mm.
human things, But when robots have to mimic humans, it does provide this model that they're supposed to do things that we do, which they're literally incapable of, right? They can mimic
Yeah, yeah.
bits and pieces, but why? Why bother, right? Um, okay, good. So, Ben, why did I bring this up? Because the mental model of how AI works is, I think, interesting, right? Because
Mm.
most people now have that buzzword.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but because we're entering, well, so here's where I wanted to draw a parallel, and I don't. You might need to help me. That's all. You might need to help me with this analogy. But I happen to grow up, so to speak, with HTML and the internet being where I learned a lot of this stuff. So the
Mm.
internet itself, invented by Tim Berners-Lee, I guess, right over in down the street here,
Mm.
um, was a markup language that was meant to be able to transfer documents across with formatting across these little weird networky pipey things, right? So you got protocols like HTTP, which are a whole world of standards. Something can make it from here to there without getting destroyed, which is no, which is tricky, right? I'm not
Mm.
dismissing that, but the language itself was pretty basic. Some of it was clever, and in fact has served us well for many, many years. But what happened was is that it kind of was released with the feeling of being open source, right? You didn't have to pay Microsoft to write a web
Mm.
page, although Microsoft, in most of my career, spent its time writing really crappy web code that I would have to go in and clean up because I learned that no, that there are three things in this world of the internet. There's the markup, and there's the behavior, which some of it can be just default by the browser. And then there's going to B, presentational code, CSS. What does it look like? And that was pretty much solidified in my early career. Let's call it 20 years ago, maybe longer,
Mm,
something like that.
mm,
Um, so what I just said though is that Microsoft comes in and writes terrible code, terrible HTML. Now, does it look okay? It's fine, but when you are trying to learn, as I am, about these different systems, you start to realize there's a couple of things. One of which, speaking of Microsoft, was Microsoft Internet Explorer, which tried its best to break every single rule possible in a proprietary way so that this new internet could somehow be owned by them. And then there was this sort of force of good, meaning Firefox, or later it
mm.
became Chrome. And then there's still, these are multi-mega companies. There's Apple that invented WebKit, which is a rendering engine. So you have Flash by Adobe. I'm trying to get to my point, but are you remembering any of this junk?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. That
all
was
right. So what you have is a fractious world of which there are principles or basic architecture, basic mental model stuff there, right? It's not owned by anyone. But then you have so many companies coming in that are attempting to rewrite some of this. And so this landscape of AI right now, can you help me understand? Like we have the weirdest thing, I think, which is this open AI. Like it's in their name, right? We are a non-for-profit company. Insane.
mm.
Out from the get-go, this non-for-profit company introduces the large language models. So that's important, right? Because there's more than one flavor of AI, as we've discussed. That's just one part of it. And they've released several over the years. And I think we started pretty much with two. Is that right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably
Two was the only one that sort of
the
was
main
cool enough.
innovation that kind of got out was two, right? I think that's when they have proven that they will be a multi-billion-dollar company, yeah?
Well, well,
At that time.
let's keep in mind insane profit, right? Because that is
Mhm.
always going to be at the uh, opposed to good practice, right? Because insane
Mhm.
profit usually means closed source, etc. Oh, by the way, I forgot to throw in Meta. So, I mean, they're in there with Llama, right? And I don't know when
Yeah,
they
yeah.
came into the picture.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a couple of years ago. Yeah, not too long.
so here we've got these, and is it fair to call them an engine? Like, is like 4.0 like an engine, a GPT engine? I don't know. What's a better word? A
Yeah,
model? I don't
it's
know.
probably yeah, yeah. I would say a model or an engine. It's probably a fair statement. Yeah,
Okay.
it's that processing module, right? That kind of does all the job, and everything outside. It's just a peripheral, kind of tooling.
And because remember, I'm going to write HTML, and I'm going to say here's a paragraph and here's a heading, and you know what I mean. This is all very
Mm,
pure structural concepts. But then I can go in, I can throw in an object, right? And that
mm,
object can have a canvas, and things started becoming adding to HTML to make it less pure about just text and make it more about imagery,
mm,
which actually took quite a long time. And I think we obviously started with language, with AI, moved into imagery. Now we have apparently the ability to do a cool cut scene of somebody walking through a forest or whatever
mm,
they do with videos now. But you see what I mean? It's still kind of
mm,
operating on that um, a different engine, and I guess
mm.
that is a question. Like LLM engine is different from, is it different? I guess it is different from an imagery engine.
Yeah, multimodal. I mean, in terms of the processing that is happening under the hood, not really.
Okay. So
So
really the sort of, I guess we'll keep the word engine, right? The engine of AI is still the matrix multiplication of just
yeah,
managing attention and choices. Doesn't really matter what the input or output is in some weird way, because a lot of it is
mm,
just a huge string of numbers. which is
Yeah,
fine,
exactly.
right?
Yeah. This original paper, attention is all you need,
Yep.
right? That initial paper is still the foundation. So whether you are processing images or video or whatever, fundamentally the linear algebra is ruling the is the foundational technology of the engine. Yes.
Okay. So to this point, what I'm trying to do is sniff out like the browser maker, like who has an unfair advantage? Because here's OpenAI is funded by Microsoft. Microsoft still revenue comes from some software that they make, I assume, right? Or whatever. But you have competitors like Apple's a good example, right? They're the anti-Microsoft, and when I worked for Salesforce, it was funny because the whole company has Apple products, which is unusual in big business because they didn't want to have anything to do with Microsoft, right? They were a competitor to and want to support non-Microsoft things, right? Whereas many businesses are like, whatever, whatever gets quote unquote the job done. They're not proprietary, but they probably go with Microsoft for whatever reason. Right?
Yeah.
LDAP. I still don't know. Does anyone else do LDAP other than Microsoft? It's
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I would
it
say
may be a
yeah,
tangent. I don't know.
yeah.
But identity to me and security always seem to be where all the fun ends, but yet that's
Mm.
where the money is to be made sometimes, right? Like no, but nobody wants to innovate in that space because it's a challenge.
Mm.
It's a huge challenge.
Mm.
But anyway, so far so good, right? So now we've got OpenAI, which is puzzling
Mm.
because all of these models are open, yet you can't do anything to them, right? They're just big masses of numbers. Is there code in there? Like, does anyone, what's in a model? Because I just downloaded 3 gig of them and I'm like,
No, you can. Yeah, right.
you can.
So what you can do is you can download basically two things, right? You can download the empty model, right? You can download basically the engine without any oil in it, right, so to speak, and then you train the engine by yourself, right? So that's one thing. So you're starting from scratch, or you can download a foundation model that has been trained already, but you will fine tune it. So you will basically modify its behavior based on the training data that you yourself as an organization, for example, you will submit, right? So you have three versions, right? You can start the model from scratch, you can modify the existing foundation model, right? Or you can use the model the way it comes from, let's say OpenAI or Meta, right? So you have three possibilities here.
Well, and just to be clear, I think it does get complicated over the holiday. I was trying to explain this and probably did a bad job because there's LLMs which know how
Mhm.
to speak and probably make images and do other sort of tricks. But then there's RAG, which is really just more of a procedural problem. Like this is maybe the browser part, and this is where I'm trying to draw an analogy. So you might understand where I'm going. Am I anywhere
Mhm.
with this? Like someone has a browser. Browsers are probably the most complicated and to me miraculous invention of all time, right? It's an amazing achievement, an internet browser of which most of us ignore it,
Mhm.
right? It's
Yeah, I
there
agree.
taking
Mhm.
stuff in, rendering it, doing, it's an amazing engine, let's call it that.
Mhm.
But there's proprietary, we had Microsoft Edge come in and out of favor, right? I think we duke it out between Safari and Chrome and Fire, but who knows?
Yeah.
There's very few people
Mhm.
that get worked up about browsers, yet they are
Mhm.
critical to our use of these things. So what I'm trying to get at is who's playing this game fairly, right? Like right now, there's no way to particularly use Meta's Llama
Mhm.
the way Meta is using it, which I'm guessing they use it for searching or God knows what with all the stuff that they've got.
Mhm.
I don't know. They're a weird box. Same thing with Teams, right? Teams could be sitting here
Mhm.
doing something, sending all the data off to be mined. Apple, I think, is trying to integrate it into the OS. Just getting started with that. I haven't seen it really accomplish much. But my question to you is metaphorically, how do we come to understand the players so we don't confuse the goals of the machine, the models, with the way they're implemented? Because I just see a new service come up every day, right?
Mm.
At least one a day. And I keep thinking like, well, you can't be baking these from scratch, right? You must be assembling this like
Mm.
websites do. Websites hopefully don't invent everything. They use Bootstrap or jQuery or um, JSON or whatever, right? Like they have protocols so that you don't have to invent every website from scratch.
Yeah, so this is very complex. So I think
As
I
are
would
all
like
my
to
problems.
I would like to maybe separate maybe the problem into like two main areas. So
Okay.
one area is how do we build the better brain, right? So how do we build better LLMs, better neural networks? How big they are supposed to be, what are the modules inside, how are supposed to be communicating, these kind of things, right? So basically creating a better brain, right?
Hmm.
So that's one problem, and maybe bigger is not necessarily better. It's kind of one direction, but another direction is probably, hey, we have supercomputing centers and we can brute force everything, so we can build something really huge, right? So there is kind of directions there, right? So that is the one thing. Now, and the other thing is, how do we train it, right? Do we have enough data that we can feed into those LLMs so that it can be trained really well? How do we do that? Are we doing it selectively? What the selection is supposed to be? How are we represent data? What is supposed to be? You're hearing probably in the news that, well, they probably already used all the internet available data, and then can we use the online publications data, all those services, and feed those into the models, and what's the quality of this data? Is that going to be conflicting and creating the HAL 9000s, because there's so much misinformation, and when you start loading all that stuff into large language models, then it's going to kind of make it really inefficient and explode and paranoid and all that stuff. So you see, there are those two things, and really, whatever you look at, whether it's the first thing, building a brain, which is very expensive, or the second thing, whether how do you train it, which is very expensive too. You are kind of beginning to look at really very large corporations that maybe there's a handful of them, and there's going to be very few players that can really do it on the large scale, right? So
Okay.
you see, I mean, this open source movement and this nonprofit and all that stuff becomes really a very difficult proposition.
Hmm. Well, you bring up a lot of good points. I guess the question, and do you have an opinion on this, which is if you, I assume OpenAI, Meta, Apple, well, let's just say OpenAI and Meta are in competition with each other.
Hmm.
Oh, and sorry, isn't there also Google does something, right? So Google's also probably in competition.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, and Apple probably would like to kind of maybe have something on their own, maybe not use other third parties LLMs. So yeah, it's kind of. And then you have the Chinese that are working on their own stuff, and you have the French that came up with the Mistral models, which were very good, and here and there's maybe smaller companies that are building smaller models. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of competition, and there's planes, right? Like there's levels, right? Like, hey, maybe we will build something smaller that is going to be really, really efficient, but maybe focusing only on a smaller domain, or maybe we will build something big that is going to be really this kind of big step towards AGI, right? Artificial General Intelligence. And then there is going to be people, hey, so let's maybe do something that is going to be a step towards the singularity, where those models will begin to kind of self-train and, basically self-improve, without our explicit kind of, intervention. So there is a lot of vectors there that really all of them probably require a lot of funding and a lot of computing power, and those 3 Mile Island nuclear power plants that are planned to be revitalized. All that energy probably may go into the into those computing resources for AI.
Totally agree. And I think then it does make a little bit sense metaphorically. We talk about an engine, right? So the AI engine that needs to run a Roomba could be great, right? It could be a great engine, and it could maybe run a lawnmower, or maybe it could run other appliances or whatever. Like, it could be useful, but it does not have to be the same engine that mimics, human conversation, right? Because unless the little robot wants to talk and tell you about the dirt it's picked up. I don't know, maybe, right? Yeah. Okay. So now we have different engines for different purposes. And so, great. Some engines are going to be rocket ships that need to go to the moon, and some engines are going to, be little tiny things that are already existing, right? Because Roomba's already got ML in it. It's already got some sort of AI. What I was trying to get at with the browser wars is, an engine doesn't do anything, right? It's an engine. Fair enough, right? Like, it has no inherent properties other than maybe the quality of its, like you just said, it's cheaper, smaller, whatever, right? You can, we in America, I guess, are always, trying to game this. Like, we have certain emission standards for trucks and different emission standards for passenger cars, and so therefore they make a lot of trucks because we don't have to make the engines quite as efficient, right? And that is just gaming. So my question to you, which might be unfair, who is gaming this the most, right? Like, obviously in competition you want to cheat. Nobody is here to be, what I kind of consider OpenAI to be, which is just, again, we're altruistic, we're the Catholic Church of the internet, everyone's free and it's all open and enjoy, right? But is that the case? Like, are we in some strange capitalistic nirvana that people are actually working cooperatively, or are we in competition, and who's going to try and game it in their own way by making our experience worse, right? Our experience is we can't write one piece of code and have it work everywhere, which is the internet's saving grace, or worst quality, right? You don't need to be a typesetter and have a printing press in order to put an article out. In fact, you and I are going to throw this out on YouTube, right? What a crazy idea that anything you want can be shared pretty much for free due to the deep pockets of our friends at Google, right?
Yeah. So this is a so now where this is, I think, where the comparison with the browser breaks in our generative AI area, because when we talked about browsers and the wars, those were really about what is the standard of the input and what is maybe the standard of the output a little bit, right? So, for example, you might have a certain type of a tag that one browser would accept, but the other one wouldn't, right? And the war was, hey, you accept my tags, and I'm not going to accept yours, right? So that was this, right? Now with our generative AI, what we are looking at is that the input is really whatever you want, right? So it could be unstructured, right? So with browsers, it was about the structure. You have to be very structured. In our environment, well, there might be some, maybe advantages to maybe saying certain things to the large language model in a certain way. So perhaps there is certain structure that gives you an advantage, but at the end of the day, well, we are in a very significant degree of unstructured information that we can submit to the system. And I know there is an OpenAI API, but this is just an API, right? It's not a huge deal. It's not gonna. There's nothing to go to war about, right? Because probably there's already in Python there's probably hundreds of translators from one API to another, and if you want to use something else, you can, right? So yeah. So in that respect, right, we are looking at the inputs and outputs that there is no wars, on the horizon, in my opinion. So then the question will be just so what's the quality, right? What's the quality of the outcome?
But
Right?
don't you see that this to me is it's a real problem, because none of us are, well, nobody to my knowledge is able to do any assessment. I know there are some benchmarks that keep getting touted, right? Like how super smarty some model is over another. But
Mm.
are there accepted benchmarks?
Yes. So I work with a few benchmarks, and I think they are very good.
Okay.
It's really I think that there's this kind of realization that, well, the AI can pass an exam, right? Like maybe a bar exam, or maybe kind of whatever, the doctor's certification. So AI today can look at a bunch of questions and answer them correctly, just based on the internal knowledge that was loaded during the training process, right? So again, you scrape the internet, you scrape the resources. Maybe you look at some books, maybe you can or cannot, scrape the Library of Congress, right? You can scrape the tax codes, load this all to the neural network, and you have a system that can answer questions very, very well, right? So that is that, right? So that's one dimension, right? The dimension that is right now, I think the battle about is the creativity. Can I do meaningful research with this stuff, right? So in other words, here's a bunch of papers that I'm gonna feed into the neural network, and at the end, after the processing is ended, after I formulate a question, right, like the AI will come up with a new research direction that makes sense, right, or will come up with an experiment that will help us discover something new, right? So I think that's where we are looking at, that's where the real competition is, right? That's the strategic direction. That's something that nations may go to war about, right? Because
Hmm.
if one nation, let's say, comes up with a system that gives it an advantage to create new technologies, from generative AI, right, and really kind of makes that will make an impact, then everybody else is screwed, right? Because now you have an advantage that is really very difficult to overcome, because you don't have to have research centers, you don't have to have thousands of PhDs who are working on whatever new technology, new engine, new battery, or whatever. You just have a system that you basically press enter, and after maybe an hour or two, or whatever the time might be, you've got a new invention that you are looking for. So that
Hmm.
is the strategic generative AI, I guess, quality, right, that everybody is after. So, and I don't know how far we are from this. We might be very close. I
I
mean,
think we're pretty close, but has it already happened that, because you and I sometimes live in a perfect world, right? Where these answers are useful. And I think what I heard, and maybe I got this wrong, is that a lot of low-hanging fruit's been taken. Let's just put it that way, right? Like
yeah,
you can go into really challenging stuff that people are not good at. And I think the example I heard was the protein folding thing. Like once you unleashed AI on protein folding, rather than finding useful
mm,
proteins, it just said, well, just fold all of them, and it did.
yeah.
And then you have the secondary problem, right? Which is there did you now you did all the sweat equity, but you're still at the point of like you said, our inputs are the real issue, right? It's not
Mm.
it's saying, hey, I want to inhibit people's interest in eating, constantly. Can you come up with something, AI? And we would guess that it could not do that, only because it still doesn't understand, like, well, like experiments, they're kind of inherently about being interpreted, right? We come up with some way to measure the speed of light, right? And if you asked a computer to do it, I don't think it would come up with the same experiment. I just don't think it understands the physical world. How's that? I don't think it could necessarily ever understand it.
Well, yeah. So that's exactly the central problem with AI, right? Is
Right.
it
Yeah.
really does it really understand something, right? Does it have a feeling that is
True. I
real,
use the
right?
word understand, which is a
Right?
problem, right?
Or this is all neural processes, exactly kind of like in human neurons, right? Like just spreading activations, through a neural network. And at the end of the day, it may not have consciousness, it may not have the real feeling, but the answer is correct. That comes out, right? It's like, hey, a chess
Oh, but
playing
but that
program,
answer
right?
still has to be operationalized, I guess is what I'm getting, which is still just the problem with life today, right? And
Yeah.
I have two hopes for AI in this manner. One is more more experiments, right? Like it can do more experiments than we could, so that we could potentially not be as averse to failure.
Hmm.
So it seems weird, right? But you know what I mean. If you were putting all of your eggs in one basket in any world, like, which we have to do, right? We buy a house in a particular neighborhood, right? We make our choices, right? And you've made your bet, and
Hmm.
then you're going to live with that bet. But if you could say, I could make any bet, but tell me, go bet all these different places and then figure out which would have been the best bet. And it's that
Yeah.
predicting quality that seems obviously pretty exciting to financial types,
Hmm.
for using AI. And I'm sure they're already, aren't all ETFs in some ways AI adjacent, right? They're using some method to pick stocks. I
Yeah,
don't know. Am I
probably
wrong?
for a very long time now, right?
For a very long
Not
time.
necessarily.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Right.
probably not generative AI, as we understand it, like today, but the models were used, for a very long time. I'm sure of it.
Yes. So I guess that's one predictor, and then this is closer to what you and I start to understand, is that rather than going back in time and trying to glean, let's say you looked at all of Reddit posts and use that to train your model, I think you get a pretty good concept of discourse, right? It's fine. You'd get the way people respond, you'd get lots of nice vectors that you could reuse, which is good. But what you and I do, and what I think, if we're talking about the very lowest level, is that you could come up with better, cleaner data, right? We're saying, hey, take any data you want and make something good out of it, which is tempting, right? You don't have to do any work at all. But what if
Mm.
in the future we wanted to actually make better databases that we could actually use because they're more trustworthy?
Mm.
And what do you think? Is that dumb? I think that maybe is dumb of me, you know?
Okay, so yeah, so I think you can operationalize generative AI in a number of different ways, right? So
Hmm.
obviously having a generative advisor that is a therapist, it's probably a great thing, right? I mean, you can have a lot of useful information that is going to be delivered to you, not as a executable kind of module or program, but kind of as an advice, as a recipe, right? And here's what you should do, right? And
Sure,
if you
right.
want, right, and you may have a great deal of those, and there is huge value in there, right? So that's one thing. What you are talking about is maybe operationalizing in a different way, where uh, you know you're trying to help solve the problem about the garbage in, garbage out, and if
Yes,
let's say
yes.
you can, and if you can very intelligently, for example, generate SQL statements that will retrieve exactly what you want, right? Or come up with some other retrieval method, maybe vector based, that is going to get you what you want, that is really relevant, and maybe kind of throw in a little bit of a quality assurance, generative based into the mix, then suddenly you're solving half of the enterprise environment problems with data, right? Where, hey,
Yes,
now it's not that difficult to have
absolutely.
good
Yes.
data. Right?
Well, and this, I mean, your example is pretty good. I don't want to do a numeric one, but I can just think of a service I just saw, which is to what is it that you need to have done in your company, and I will come up with a title and a job description and all that for you, right? Like
Mm.
the idea that the job description and on the opposing part, the resume, are both weirdly functional artifacts of nothing in particular, right? It's
Mm.
like they're just casting nets in a certain way, whereas AI could actually probably do this, or a generative process or a training process could probably do this easier to say, if you could tell me what you want, I could probably point you more toward the skill set that can help you do that. That,
Mm.
however, gets to a human thing, whereas, like, do you even know how to get anything done, right? And that's what's interesting. I mean, probably in a bigger context, maybe next time. I always love to talk
Mm.
about predictability and prioritization and time management, right? Because if we knew how long something would take, life
Mm.
would be much, much easier. But we operate in uncertainty, and oftentimes our uncertainty leads to so many human things. Procrastination. I mean, I'm still looking at a bunch of leftover dishes from the party. You know what I mean? Like, why didn't I
Mm.
just clean them up then? You see what I mean? It would have only taken a couple of minutes, but now, oh, everything's all dried up and it's baked on. And you see what I mean? Like, the procrastination has led to a bigger problem. And I think writ large, you can look at that in a business sense, right? That there must be staggering inefficiencies when it comes to people, time, effort.
Exactly, and I think that maybe whether it's doing the dishes manually or with a Tesla robot, for example, or whether writing retrieving data from databases manually or through generative algorithms, this kind of goes to the same thing. Like, what do you do with that extra time that you would get? Uh,
Yes.
right? Are you gonna write a poem, right? Or are you gonna kind of do something that is going to be really kind of like benefiting uh, you or the organization, or are you gonna be simply maybe getting more rest so you don't burn out writing like thousands of lines of code every day? Instead, maybe you're going to write 10 lines of code and it's going to be much better. So all these things really kind of like are problems that we don't know the answers for, right? Because there is other forces that are kind of going against that, right? Like, hey, if there is this generative AI everybody, then maybe you don't have a job anyway. So maybe that efficiency that you're gaining is really not an efficiency. It's just kind of like, hey, UBI, basically, kind of like, kind of hanging on over our heads. So I don't know where this is going, but those efficiencies are now within our grasp, right? And um,
Well, I think you pointed out I think the misuse. I still want to draw it back to the browser wars, which is lack of collaboration and cooperation means you can game it and you can cheat. And for example, I think I only hear this anecdotally, right? But many positions are being eliminated because AI can do it, right? I mean,
no.
you hear that a lot, and then this could be at a level where could AI do the job of an HR department? I'm kind of thinking, well, that's one job that it would actually be pretty good at. You know what I mean? Which is the
Mm,
massive in, massive outputs, big inefficiencies, right? And
mm,
really it's a pure communications job, only to suffice to have this one outcome, which is a job getting done by somebody, right? Like you've got your inputs and outputs are pretty clear, which is good for AI. Whereas
mm,
other jobs such as leadership, right, are puzzling jobs. You know, maybe your leadership to a small group of people that sit with you in, corporate headquarter A or something like that, but most of your workers are actually offshore.
mm.
And most of the work getting done is getting done to some, like you said, some. Um, I know my sister works in banking, and basically they're tracking keystrokes and mouse movements just to make sure you haven't gone off and sit around and thought about something.
Mm.
You see what I mean? Like, so you can game this negatively quicker, I think, than you can game it positively. But as I said, that could be our next topic, maybe.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
especially because you don't know how long things take or how hard things are. That's where I think, the crux of the problem is that, we always say something is challenging or difficult, and yet we can throw billions at it and say, yeah, it was really challenging and difficult, and we failed. But we
Mm,
tried, still there. You know what I mean? Here's all the monuments that we've built, and here's all the artifacts that we have. But we never knew in the beginning that it wasn't possible to do. So to me, there's this, were people just not smart enough? Did you not have the right people on the team? Or was it just too profitable to build your own browser and try to put the other browsers out of business? Even though
yeah.
it failed, right? I'm calling Microsoft out, as I love to do, because they fail at all these things, but yet they screw it up for everybody along the way, right? They make it harder for all the practitioners, and maybe it gave us all jobs, so we should be
Mm,
grateful. Thank you, Microsoft.
mm.
But not having or having worked in these worlds that run off of poorly named spreadsheets, I think that's where I'm like, hey, there's got to be some angle here where there's low hanging fruit and we have a technology, but this technology isn't there to be the smartest person on earth, right?
Mm.
It's really there to give you better ability to make decisions. Again, I'm utopic now. We're back to Star Trek, right? It's all for the good of the Federation,
Well, yeah.
because
I mean,
we're good people. We're not Star Warsy. They have the Empire. They suck, right? We don't want them to have good computers because they would just
no.
make Luke work harder.
Yeah, and I mean, so decision making is one, right? And but I would probably also throw in the automation piece, right? I mean, there is a lot of things that probably is there's a benefit to automating certain
100%.
things,
Sure.
so like automated firefighters, right? If we could have robotic systems, like the DARPA challenge that was announced after the Fukushima disaster, that hey, let's have robots that can really work within highly radioactive and highly dangerous environments, so that you can have a robot that is going to walk into that environment and flip the switch and prevent a greater disaster, right? Or close a valve, right?
Why
Or
did they put the
maybe,
switch in there? Anyway, keep going.
yeah, exactly, right. So that's or maybe walk into a burning house and get somebody out, right?
Yeah.
So that there's quite a few things that we probably should be automating, and but unfortunately, right, it might mean that fire departments will not employ that many people anymore. Uh, so is that a good thing or a bad thing, right? I mean,
Well,
you can argue both sides.
uh, we can and we will. This is the beginning of another new year.
Mm,
I think this is a good spot. How's that?
mm,
Because
yeah.
I know that we go on, and I want to write this up because I think it's fascinating, and I'm going to try to add a little more clarity to my curiosity, because we started with models, and I still think there's something there, but then, you know, the use of these models, how it affects us, is obviously a bigger question. But as always, it's a pleasure to share this time with you, Jack. So cheers. Here's to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Yeah, see you soon.
Absolutely. Cheers.